These are the notes for Unit 4, Part 1, Articles 1 through 3 of the Constitution. The notes that we will be taking on the Constitution will be brief because the concepts are complicated and I want to take a look at the actual text in class together. But this will give you an idea of what that text says and give you a preview before we dive into it in class. The main ideas we'll be discussing today are the principles of the Constitution, Article 1, 2, and 3, and then a brief explanation of checks and balances. We'll go further into that together in class. In the Constitution, it states that our government is made up of the following principles: federalism, republicanism, and then also the protection of individual rights. These are the principles that ground our understanding and belief system within the United States of America and unites everybody's beliefs as to what America is about and how our government should be ran. In the previous notes, we already discussed the preamble, which states how the Constitution is different from the Articles of Confederation. Within the Constitution, we also discuss these three principles and how those principles make the Constitution different from the Articles. Federalism is a division of power between the federal government and the states. So although there is power given to the states and to the national government, this idea of federalism states that those powers are different. Under the Constitution, the powers that are not listed within the Constitution automatically go to the states. The powers that are listed go to the national government. Republicanism is the citizens elect officials to carry out their wants. This is the belief system behind a democracy and is more similarly known as our form of government. And the protection of individual rights. As a result of the limit of the rights of the colonists through the series of acts, it's important to add the protection of individual rights to our Constitution and recognize the innate and unalienable rights that every citizen has. Within the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, or otherwise known as the Bill of Rights, those individual rights are stated. We will take a further look into those when we get to the Bill of Rights portion of our unit. The first three articles of the Constitution describe the three branches of government. These three branches are divided up by what types of roles they play and the powers that they have. They're balanced, yet different powers, so not one is better than the other or has more power than the other. This is called the separation of powers. It limits the powers of the government by dividing the government into three distinct branches. That's what its purpose is. And each of those branches serves a duty. We'll start with Article 1, which is the legislative branch. The first three articles of the Constitution describe the three branches of government. These three branches are divided up by what types of roles they play and the powers that they have. They're balanced, yet different powers, so not one is better than the other or has more power than the other. This is called the separation of powers. It limits the powers of the government by dividing the government into three distinct branches. That's what its purpose is. And each of those branches serves a duty. We'll start with Article 1, which is the legislative branch. The legislative branch is made up of Congress, which is divided into two parts, the House of Representatives and the Senate. This is what we talked about during the Constitutional Convention, and it was a result of the Great Compromise. The House of Representatives has more people in it because it's based on population of each state, and the Senate has 2 representatives per state. So as of now, that means that there's 100 senators within the Senate. So what does Congress do? The most important power that they have is to make laws. There's a system in which laws are passed, which we'll talk about in another series of notes, and that's described in Article 1 as well. In order for a bill to become a law, it needs to go through both the House of Representatives and the Senate, as they have equal power and equal say in the lawmaking system. Congress also has the power to print and coin money, approve treaties. They can also override a president veto, which is like a president rejecting a law that Congress passes. They can impeach and remove a president, and they can declare war. Many of these powers are also part of the checks and balances system that limits the power of one branch. For example, although the president has a power to veto, which is a check on the legislative branch can override that veto, which is a check on the president's branch or the executive branch. Article 2 is the executive branch. It involves the president, the vice president, and the president's cabinet members, which are like the people that help him make decisions. The most important power that they have is to enforce laws. So to make sure that those laws are enforced within society. The president has the power to appoint cabinet and justices. Justices are judges that serve on the Supreme Court within the judicial branch. They can veto laws, which limits the power of the legislative branch. And they serve as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, possibly one of the most important roles of president. The judicial branch is made up of the Supreme Court justices and the federal courts. Federal means national law, so not within the state courts. Their most important power is to interpret laws. They can also declare laws unconstitutional, which limits the powers of Congress and also the president, and they can declare executive actions unconstitutional as well. So they keep the president in check and make sure that he is doing everything to maintain what the Constitution has. By interpret laws, going up to the first power that's listed, I mean that the Supreme Court judges interpret what the Constitution means and how it applies to certain situations. This is very important in regards to who the president appoints, because according to different political systems and views, some justices will interpret the law differently than other justices would. So it's very important to keep in mind that these people interpret something very, very important known as the Constitution. Some are very strict in interpreting the law of the Constitution, and some are more flexible, depending on the justice. As I mentioned before, we have a checks and balances system within our government. It makes sure that each branch of government has the power to check or limit the powers of the other two. The purpose of this is to guarantee that no branch of government becomes too powerful. This goes back to the theory of having kings. The colonists very much disliked the King of England, and they felt like he had too much power. So by giving an executive role to a president, they wanted to make sure he wasn't a king. So they divided up the powers into 3 different branches and made sure that not one would be more powerful than the other, like a king would be. In class, we'll go over which powers serve as checks and balances. Throughout your notes, I've given you some previews and some hints as to what those may be. Your next notes will be on how a bill is passed, and then after that, we'll review the remaining articles 4 through 7.